Good morning. Thank you for joining me for the 2020-2021 mid-year fiscal update and economic statement. This is our government's second fiscal update and economic forecast since the COVID-19 pandemic began. I presented the last update at the end of August. That time we were about 6 months into the pandemic, and today we're still dealing with the impacts of COVID-19 and a once-in-a-generation economic downturn. But this latest fiscal update shows that we are beginning to see early signs of recovery. Early this year, Alberta was hit by a triple black swan event. This includes the largest global economic contraction since the Great Depression. We've experienced an unprecedented drop in energy prices, and at the same time, we're combating a pandemic within our own borders. These three things have combined to hit Alberta and our resource-based economy much harder than other jurisdictions. But we've also responded to these challenges quicker than other jurisdictions. Back in March, the government added $500 million in additional funding for health. When we include PPE costs, government has added an additional $1.2 billion to the health budget related to COVID-19. Combined with the March adjustment, we've added a total of $1.7 billion to the health budget. Alberta was the first to introduce a comprehensive recovery plan. This recovery plan is predicated on positioning the province for investment attraction and economic growth. It includes investments in infrastructure projects throughout the province that will improve our productivity and competitiveness and create immediate job opportunities for Albertans. As a government, we're developing new and better strategies to build on our advantages in energy, agriculture, technology, and tourism, and to support growth in other high-opportunity sectors such as finance, logistics, and aviation. Our pandemic and recovery-related initiatives are making a difference, but a significant fiscal challenge remains. The deficit forecast for 2020-2021 is $21.3 billion. This forecast is a $2.8 billion improvement from first quarter, as Alberta's revenue outlook has improved over the last 3 months. Revenue for the year is projected to be $3 billion higher than we projected last quarter. This increase is due to improved forecasts for bitumen and other non-renewable resource revenue, increased investment income, and transfers from the Government of Canada. Total expense is forecast at $62.7 billion. This is only slightly higher than last quarter's forecast and funds our pandemic response, economic recovery initiatives, and economic stimulus initiatives. Expenses not including COVID-19 measures have decreased by $156 million from budget 2020. Although we're facing significant challenges, we are managing our expenses carefully, and we remain committed to delivering programs and services in the most efficient manner possible. Overall, economic activity remains well below February's level, but the forecast has improved. Alberta's real GDP is now expected to contract by 8.1% in 2020. Government forecasters expect real GDP to begin recovering next year with growth of 4.4%. But while we're starting to see recovery, Alberta's real GDP will not return to 2019 levels until early 2023. We've seen a significant rebound in employment already this year, recovering more than 258,000 of the 361,000 jobs lost between February and April. The unemployment rate has fallen steadily from the highs it hit this spring. However, the labor market still has a long way to go to reach full recovery and is not expected to surpass 2019 levels until 2022. There's no question that the pandemic and the shutdown of economic activity has been and still is challenging for many Albertans, but there are signs of hope in our economy. For example, in spite of the economic challenges Alberta has already faced, this year, Calgary has seen record levels of venture capital attraction. By the end of August, Calgary saw over $200 million of venture capital, an increase of $64 million over the previous year, with 4 months remaining. Today, I will table an appropriation bill to ensure our healthcare system is adequately resourced and economic recovery initiatives have the required funding. The bill requests a total of $5.7 billion in supplementary supply. Rest assured, the government continues to be focused on responsible fiscal management and fiscal prudence. Just as Alberta was the first province to introduce an economic recovery plan in response to COVID-19, we will also be the first to introduce a comprehensive plan to reduce the resulting deficit. To start, I'm introducing 3 new fiscal anchors. These anchors will inform and guide government decisions and ensure we're best positioned for fiscal recovery. First, we will bring our spending in line with that of other provinces. In its report, the McKinnon panel concluded that Alberta spends more per capita than comparable provinces without achieving better outcomes. We began taking steps toward bringing spending down in 2019, and outside of our pandemic response, we've made good progress, but there's more to do. We will evaluate Alberta's spending levels and outcomes relative to other comparable jurisdictions and take actions to be at least as efficient. Second, we will take measures to keep our debt manageable by keeping Alberta's net debt to GDP ratio below 30%. GDP is a measure of a jurisdiction's economic output and has a strong correlation to a jurisdiction's own ability to generate revenues. The ratio indicates a government's ability to repay its current debt. The higher the ratio, the greater the burden on government to repay. Third, once we can see our way clear of the pandemic, we will present a timeline for balancing the budget. On that note, the budget survey is still available on alberta.ca, and I will be hosting telephone town halls next week. I encourage everyone to visit the budget consultations page on alberta.ca for more information. In conclusion, while hardship lies ahead, we are beginning to see evidence of economic recovery. Economic recovery and efficient delivery of government services are both critically important for fiscal recovery. As we continue to face the challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic, we will continue to do everything we can to protect Albertans while also managing our finances responsibly. Thank you, and I'm pleased to take questions.
Okay, so we will head over to the phones now. Just a quick reminder that we'll do 1 question and 1 follow-up. With that, operator, can you please put through the first caller?
First is Emma Graney with the Globe and Mail. Go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, g'day, Minister. My first question, page 11 of the document there, there's a note there saying that the public sector doesn't create jobs, it doesn't create wealth. In fact, it says it's withdrawing money from the economy, and that's a direct quote. Can you explain that position, given that the public sector actually pays taxes, they spend in the community, and kind of provide vital services to Albertans?
Sure. Well, thanks for that, Emma. Absolutely. The public sector does provide vital services to Albertans, and you know, there's not been a time in recent history where that provision of service has been more appreciated. But the reality is, while the public sector does pay income taxes, as every other employee across Alberta pays taxes, ultimately, it's private sector wealth creation that funds public service delivery. So to that end, we know that our economic recovery is absolutely critical to our fiscal health in the province.
Okay, and just kind of a follow-up here. Actually, it's not a follow-up, it's a question, but I'm asking it anyway. Today, the Canada Energy Regulator has come out and said that we have passed peak oil consumption last year, in fact, if the world keeps moving towards more climate change measures. A, do you have a response to that? But B, how confident are you when you have the CER saying that, you have the IEA saying that, you have BP saying we've passed peak oil? How confident are you that the oil and gas predictions in the most recent fiscal update are in fact reasonable?
Well, firstly, our projections that we're providing as part of the mid-year update are quite conservative relative to private sector projections, both for the current year and for the out years. And more broadly on energy usage, we know that fossil fuel energy will be important globally for decades to come. And given Alberta's incredibly responsible ESG initiatives, the fact that we are the most environmentally responsible energy producer in the world, we know that there's a solid future, a great future for the Alberta energy industry. That being said, we also believe that there's a great future for many other sectors in this province. And I expect that over the next number of months and years that we will see increasing diversification in our economy. And that's why part of our economic recovery plan includes individual sector strategies that look to position a number of sectors, both traditional sectors as well as new and emerging sectors, for growth in this province.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Graham Thompson with iPolitics. Go ahead, Graham.
Thank you. Minister, I was just wondering, a provincial sales tax. I'm trying to figure out what is the government's stance right now. You've got this, the debt is big. It's not as big as we first thought it might be. The deficit's a little bit smaller than it would be otherwise, but it's still gigantic on both fronts. So can you explain what is the UCP government's policy on bringing in a provincial sales tax?
Well, thanks for that, Graham. Our policy today on a sales tax is that we have no plans to introduce one. The reality to introduce a sales tax at this point of great economic challenge would be really poor economic policy. We're focused on economic recovery as job number one, and we're focused on delivering the most efficient government services possible, job number two. We think that those two initiatives right now are the most important initiatives. Those are initiatives that will position the province for economic recovery and growth, which will be essential to deal with our fiscal challenge.
And as a follow-up, just so I'm clear, I've seen some quotes of you talking about you're not looking at a PST right now, but it's a possibility in the future. So are you saying never to a PST, or is it something you might consider later on?
What I'll say again, Graham, we have no plans to introduce a PST in the province. Again, focused on economic recovery, delivering government services efficiently, and we have some work to do there. I have made reference to the fact that down the road, it would make sense to appoint a revenue panel, similar to the McKinnon panel, to consider the appropriateness and efficiency of government revenues. I think that would be a very logical, rational initiative. But at this point in time, we're focused on economic recovery and delivering efficient government services.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Jeffrey Morgan with the Financial Post. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Minister, wanted to ask, you see in the budget here that the province no longer expects it will be able to balance its budget in the previous time frame. Is that going to be pushed out by a year, 2 years, 5 years? What's your expectation at this point on when this government will be able to balance the budget?
Yeah, good. Jeffrey, thanks for that question. Reluctantly, but necessarily, we will have to delay balancing the budget. Of course, we had presented a four-year fiscal plan in Budget 2019 that would bring us to balance within our first term, which was a commitment we made to Albertans. Budget 2020 followed along with that original fiscal plan. Right now, with our great economic challenge, significant reduction in revenues that will be with us for some years, we will not be able to balance in our first term. And I don't have a definitive date today. The reality is we're still in a global pandemic. And until we can actually see our way clear of that pandemic and start to get additional economic certainty, I think it would be disingenuous to provide a date. That's one reason why we are introducing fiscal anchors in the meantime. Responsible fiscal management has never been more important. And that's why we're introducing the fiscal anchor of ensuring that we're delivering efficient government, ensuring that our per capita spend is consistent with that of comparable provinces. That's why we're identifying a net debt to GDP ratio that will also guide our decision making. And again, as we start to see our way clear of this pandemic, we will be presenting a timeline to achieve balance.
Okay, thank you. And as a follow-up, the budget documents do show declining revenue sources over the next 3 years. What is the largest share of that decline? And given that the revenue declines are expected over 3 years, is the government, was the government's move to reduce corporate income taxes at an accelerated rate partly responsible for this reduction in revenues?
The accelerated reduction of corporate income tax revenues, the job creation tax cut, does not have a real significant impact on revenue collection. Firstly, we were going to get there within a short period of time anyways, and that was within our legislation. Secondly, again, because the economy is challenged, corporate earnings will be much lower this year and next year because of the economic challenge. The revenue that government's foregoing in the short and intermediate term will be lower than it otherwise would have been. So in terms of the large reduction in government revenues, non-renewable resource revenues are expected to be significantly lower, certainly for the current year that we're in, but even for the next, in the intermediate or medium term, I should say. And that's again due to expected lower global energy prices and lower production from what we were otherwise predicting in Budget 2020, as the whole industry has been, will be experiencing a reset. Of course, corporate tax revenues will be lower overall, and largely due to the fact that corporate earnings will be much lower than we would have budgeted in 2020. And again, that's as a result of our great economic challenge. But revenues are down, across the board, and the reality is there's just less economic activity in the province, and that shows up in almost every revenue line in the province.
Operator, can you please put through the next question?
Next is Chris Bargo with the Calgary Herald. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, Minister. With the second wave of the virus now upon us, is the worst over for the Alberta economy? And when you look at your unemployment forecast contained in this document, it looks like there's no recovery back to 2019 levels until at least 2023. What would you say to people who are looking for jobs right now?
Yeah, well, a great question, Chris. We are expecting a bit of a protracted recovery. We will not be back to 2019 levels next year. We're expecting to be back to 2019 employment levels in late 2022. And what I would say to Albertans looking for a job is we're doing everything we can to see economic recovery in this province. We know that's critically important for Albertans who need an opportunity right now, who need an opportunity to provide for themselves and their family. And so part of our economic recovery plan is an increased capital spend. So we are going to be making further strategic investments in infrastructure projects, projects that will improve our productivity and competitiveness in the long term. In the long term, actually attract additional private sector investment and grow our economic capacity in the province. But in the short term, they will provide tens of thousands of jobs to Albertans that need an opportunity. So again, we're seeing some hopeful signs that recovery is starting. And so that's positive, but it will take some time to get to where we were in 2019. We're positioning the province to attract investment, and we're positioning the province for economic recovery.
And just to follow up on my first question there, do you think with another wave of the coronavirus and maybe some more lockdown measures coming, is the worst over for the economy? That's that first question I wanted to ask you. And separately, you keep talking about that 30% debt to GDP anchor. If that's in place for next year, how much does spending need to come down by to meet that goal?
Okay, well, firstly, in terms of the pandemic realities, again, COVID-19's created an environment of uncertainty, and not just here in Alberta, but around the world. And we're managing our finances in a world of uncertainty at this point in time. And so what we have done, we've put $750 million, allocated $750 million to a COVID contingency for the next fiscal year. We don't think that we're going to be past this pandemic at the end of the fiscal year, March 31st, 2021. We believe that we're going to be dealing with the fallout of the pandemic into the next fiscal year. And so we have allocated funds to provide for a response. I can't say whether the worst days are behind us in this pandemic. I'm hopeful when I'm seeing some signs of economic recovery out there. And again, we're doing all we can to position the province for recovery, but I can't say definitively that our toughest days are behind us. But what I can say is we are starting to see signs of some economic recovery, so that is positive. Now, Chris, you did have a follow-up question. Can you just repeat that?
Yeah, just the debt to GDP anchor of 30%. If that goal is in place next year, how much does your spending need to come down by in order for you to reach that target?
In order to stay well below the 30% net debt to GDP ratio, we're going to need to bring our spending in line again with comparative provinces on a per capita basis. And Budget 2019, Budget 2020 got us a long ways there. As you recall, the McKinnon panel pointed out that we were out of whack by about $10 billion a year in 2019. At the end of our four-year fiscal plan, the plan that we presented in Budget 2019, we actually got within about $2.5 billion of the interprovincial comparator average on a per capita basis. In my view, we need to look to achieve additional savings to bring us in line with other provinces.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Dean Bennett with the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Dean.
Thanks. Morning, Minister.
Good morning.
I appreciate these reports are a snapshot in time. So I'm just wondering what happens. I'm trying to anticipate what these numbers might look like after the 4:30 announcement. I know you can't talk about that, but are these numbers? If we get a decision approaching the lockdown that we saw in the spring, would that materially affect these numbers and projections that we're seeing right now?
Dean, these numbers, again, as I mentioned earlier, they do reflect the COVID pandemic reality in the province. And again, there is much uncertainty week to week, month to month with respect to the pandemic, but our projections right now do continue to anticipate the province battling COVID, not only for this fiscal year, but also into the next fiscal year.
And just as a follow, what are the, sorry, it's a bit simplistic, but what are the assumptions underlying the fact that we're going to see slow economic recovery? Is there anything in here, like are a lot of people banking on a vaccine in 2021? Is that what's underlying a lot of these projections for economic growth globally?
You know, we're not predicting when a vaccine will be available to Albertans or to or available to folks around the globe, because you know, as you're insinuating in that question, so much of our economic reality here in the province of Alberta is dependent on the global economy and global energy prices. So what we are doing with our projections, we are reflecting the fact that we believe the results of the pandemic will be around for some time, and they also reflect current private sector forecasts. But I do want to say this: we continue to live in a time of great economic uncertainty because of the pandemic. We'll be presenting a budget in February, Budget 2021, and of course we'll have updated projections at that point in time.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Janet French with CBC. Go ahead, Janet.
Thanks for taking my question, Minister. Just looking at your projected expenses over the next couple of years, and also just hearing the language that you're using around bringing our expenses in line with other jurisdictions, how much do you need to reduce spending on the public sector by 2023 in order to hit these goals?
Well, Janet, good question. All I'll say is public sector compensation in Alberta is high relative to other provinces. The McKinnon panel pointed that out to us in their report. And again, we can no longer afford to be an outlier. So public sector costs are over half of the province's budget at about $27 billion. They're very significant and material. So we need to work together constructively with the public sector to, over time, bring those costs in line with other provinces and ensure a sustainable public sector for the future.
But do you have a goal? I mean, in the budget 2020, I believe there was a percentage by which you intended to reduce the public service and job numbers over the next 3 years. What do those goals look like now?
Janet, what I would suggest is stay tuned for Budget 2021 when we'll be presenting an updated fiscal plan. This mid-year update is basically a Budget 2020 with adjustments that we've made largely as a result of COVID with current economic realities overlaying around revenues. And so stay tuned for Budget 2021. Again, broadly, we need to ensure that we're delivering services most efficiently. Public sector costs are a big part of our service delivery. We've been an outlier, and I'm hopeful that we can work constructively with the public sector to, in time, bring those costs in line and, again, ensure sustainability into the future.
And we only have time for one more question, so operator, can you please put through our last caller?
Final caller is Mirna Juchik with Radio Canada. Go ahead, Mirna.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. You said that the predictions do take into account that we will be battling COVID-19, but I'm wondering to what extent. If there are additional restrictions in the following months, including closing restaurants or shops, will the economic outlook, the 8.1% for this year, and the prediction for revenue still hold?
Well, that's a great question. And again, I'll start my answer with saying we live right now in a world of great uncertainty. And I can't predict the trajectory of this pandemic in the province. I can't necessarily predict what type of measures, public health measures, will be required to keep it under control. One thing I can say is that as we consider public health measures, we recognize the great importance of ensuring that as much of the economy can stay open as possible, because we recognize the great impact that has on entrepreneurs, businesses, and employees who depend on those businesses for employment. So again, our projections do consider and include the fact that we believe we'll be in a pandemic environment for the rest of this fiscal year and into the following fiscal year. I can't become any more granular than that at this point in time. We have, for our next fiscal year, again, included $750 million in a COVID contingency, recognizing that there'll likely be, almost certainly be, some costs related to COVID. I really can't get more granular than that.
Can you tell us if the restrictions that will be announced this afternoon are taken into account in this prediction?
Well, again, broadly, I can say that our projections reflect the fact that we're in a pandemic, that there will be some constraints on the economy because of that. Stay tuned for the announcement this afternoon.
Thanks for calling in, everyone, and have a good morning.